and they cut off his head and gave it to him.
Throw it over the wall.
Yeah. Don't worry about coming in here.
Yeah.
We're going to keep this locked.
So, for those watching at home, you want to know where Red Rover started?
Oh, my goodness.
Here we are, back again. Same 3 chairs, same 3 Bibles, same book,
Yeah.
2 Samuel. Picking up in chapter 13, I was telling Randall earlier, I feel like the star of this show is Joab.
For sure. When you get to chapter 14, it definitely shifts toward him.
Yeah. It's just wreaking havoc in David's household. Probably consequences of his sin with Bathsheba, and now we get the fallout of this is what happens when people do what's right in their own eyes, essentially.
Well, and so some of this is perhaps rated for television.
Yeah, we definitely don't. When the little YouTube thing comes up and it's like, is this for children? I'm like, nope. Never. We never know what Randall's going to say. Okay. As far as chapter 13, yeah, Absalom and then Amnon. Amnon, is, we believe, is firstborn. Absalom, probably the third. Absalom was the one whose full sister probably was Tamar, and she was described as very beautiful. Now, one of the first things that we come into in verse 2 is that he was so tormented that he made himself ill. And obviously, this is a lustful type of thing. That's the majority of what is tormenting him. And one of the things that I tend to go along with this is because I was trying to feel out, why is it that tormented is the word that's used? Why don't they just put it in terms of he lusted after her? But they put it in terms of it tormented him. He made himself ill over it. And I think, it's telling. It's telling for us. It's telling for us in the fact that we can be the same. We can find ourselves in the same place.
Yeah.
That we are making ourselves sick over whatever it is that we're lusting over. It could be any sort of substance. It can be any sort of addiction. It can be lust as we typically think about it. You name it. That we can even make ourselves sick over it.
Yeah.
My mind also goes to not just to pick on one particular sin, but at the same time in our culture right now, when it comes to the homosexuality type of stuff, then one of the big arguments is, well, this is just how I was created, and how can I get past these lusts that I have? How can I get past these attractions that I have? And I would say that he's, at the very least, he's probably making the same argument. Yeah. How can I possibly get past this? And
well, justify anything you want to justify, right?
Yeah.
And we do it. Material stuff, there's always something that, we want, right? And so how badly do we want it? Does it become something that has consumed us, which is what's happened to him? This thing that perhaps started off somewhat innocently now has become a consumption of him. And it's and that's never healthy. All things in moderation, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that we understand too is regardless of what was happening in the world around them, that this incest, God had spoken about it, that it was already within the law. Even Tamar, as he's getting ready to defile her, basically, then she pleads for this. Don't do this wicked and grievous thing. Such a thing is not done in Israel, that we are a holy people. This is not allowable by law. So even if you think that this is okay in somehow, some way. And then she also points out that it's going to not only ruin her, so kind of appealing to, well, if he really did have some sort of love, which we obviously know that that's not the case, she's appealing to, this is going to ruin me and it's going to ruin you. There we find in verse 13 is kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems to her opinion, at least, that she was an allowable prospect. It says, speak to the king, and he will not withhold me from you.
Which I don't get.
Yeah.
Because again, I think the fact that she's playing on it as far as not such a thing is done in Israel, and what God's law said as far as you shall not take the offspring of someone you're related to, basically your father or your mother, because you're uncovering their nakedness, is how it was put.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not really sure that part, that second part of 13.
Yeah, it's interesting to me too. Some questions when we get to heaven.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe Amnon knew that. She said it, and he was like, no, the king won't give me to you, so I have to do this my way. If
we had any sort of saying, okay, well, maybe we give him the benefit of the doubt that he did really love her, truly, or something like that, then it's put to rest that is not the case, because as soon as he violates her, then verse 15, it says that he hated her, and hated her even more than he ever loved her.
Well, it was, the way he put it. We didn't have to get that far. We knew true love doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So true love cares about the person, not just about the pleasure. And you care more about the person, actually, what true love does. And so you protect the people you love.
Yeah, the whole thing is like he had this idea in his head, and then when she didn't go along with it willingly, then it just all fell apart. And so this whole idea of what they could be together, now it's just ruins. And so, and he ruined it for sure.
And so this was the first domino and a number of falls here. And again, we believe this is all part of what Nathan was referencing whenever he told David the sword's not going to leave your house. And so this is like the first thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, and that was just in the last chapter, as far as from 13, if you go back into 12.
And so this sets brother against brother. And so Absalom plays the long game. He's angry.
Yeah.
David's angry, does nothing. Again, I think this is failure as a father and failure as a king. Something should have been done. She is exactly right. This thing should not happen in Israel, because there's laws against it. And so now the law has been violated. It was violated by David's son. Something should have been done. He does nothing. Again, failure. Absalom takes matters into his own hands. Also, never a great idea. And plays the long game. Tells her to sit tight. Don't worry about it. Lets 2 years go by. And so his ultimate goal, I'm not sure if he's thinking at this point, hey, I'm going to steal the kingdom from Dad. But he's definitely thinking, I'm going to get Amnon back for this. Yeah. And so, I mean, because he kind of says, hey, just sit tight. Don't worry about it. I got this. And 2 years later, he hatched it, had his brother murdered at a banquet he was throwing.
Yeah, and even just the way that it's listed as far as David not wanting him to go, but then letting him go, we get the impression that David knew that things were not right.
Yeah.
There was obvious turmoil within his house.
Yeah.
He hadn't seen Tamar. She was living with Absalom, and Absalom, I'm sure, was not, going before David's face, so to speak, as we see later on when he brings him back and everything. But still, it's hard to see that this is what David has sunk down to, as far as when we look at him and all the greatness that we get and the role model type aspects, good character and, type of Christ and all that. But then seeing the great failure
it's
too.
a chapter of tragedy.
Yeah.
The one he began. And, but like you said, you can pick your sin, you can't pick your consequences. Man, it just keeps rolling. But obviously he knew, I think if Absalom had tried this a year earlier, it would have been a no-go. Because David, I think, knew that there was going to be trouble from this.
Yeah.
One, because it happened. Two, because he didn't deal with it. So here we are. Absalom deals with it. Doesn't do it perhaps in the right way or at the right time. But did Amnon deserve to die?
I mean, according to the law.
According to the law, yeah.
But it just wasn't carried out the way it was supposed to be carried out.
Right. The law does not give us vigilante.
Yeah.
It's like there's opportunities there to go to the law.
Well, and I think it also points out David, it's not just his inability to act, it's also his unwillingness to trust God in the fact that this was his firstborn. Now, we're given insight later or earlier, as far as Solomon, being born to Bathsheba and everything. We know where that goes in the long run, but David doesn't. And if Amnon being his firstborn, he's like, man, this is the heir to the throne. And so that's probably a lot of why he's overlooking and kind of letting it go. But at the same time, there's got to be this warring within himself to do what's right. But he's at a loss. And I can only imagine that he's just distraught over the fact that he knows what Nathan had said. And so he's carrying it with him.
Right.
And this all just kind of reminds me that David was probably the greatest king that Israel ever had. And I think when we get into Kings and Chronicles, we see that everybody's being compared to David in a way. And it just proves that David wasn't the best. And there is still one to come that will be better.
Right.
I was thinking about that, even just how David was the best king, but he wasn't even the first king. He was the second king.
Right.
And so David being the first best king means that there's going to be a second better king.
Once you read the story, you realize he left a lot of room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now he's got one child that's been raped, another child that is dead, and a third child that is missing. Had to flee.
Yeah.
So in
Enter
exile.
Joab.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Chapter 14.
Verse 39 of chapter 13, the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom. So we see that, and then we see the warring within him because he was comforted about Amnon. So he realizes, okay, well, justice has been done, but at the same time, now he's caring for Absalom too. And so it's kind of like he's had this heavy burden knowing that he didn't do anything, and that's been lifted in a sense. But now he's got another issue now with Absalom, which is going to just get worse. Yeah.
So Absalom was gone for 3 years, and so in that period of time, David obviously began to miss him. So enter stage left, the saga of Joab.
Yeah.
Now the backdrop is still David. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
it's all part of his kingship that we're still working in. But for the next little bit, Joab has a heavy hand in a lot of what's going to happen.
Yeah, and along with the other people, that's hard to keep track of who's for who and who's not, and
Right.
back and forth. And this person goes to the loyalty of that person.
And so
it's a soap opera.
my takeaway on his character, at least, is that Joab had no spiritual foundations. What I'm thinking, he was pragmatic in everything, and he got a few things right along the way. You say, okay, that was probably a good move, or that was a good decision, but it's all just pragmatism. He just whatever works, or whatever works in the moment, or whatever works best for him, seems to be the driving reality. He wants David to be successful. We've seen that. I think he is adamant that David be king and do a kingly job, but also Joab's adamant for Joab too. And so he puts a whole lot of Joab in a lot of his decisions.
Right.
And so I just whenever I read it, I don't see a whole lot of spiritual foundation to what he's trying to make happen or not make happen.
Yeah, I think it's very evident. I mean, especially if we're going to contrast Joab's, spiritual life with David's. David's always inquiring of the Lord.
Right.
Joab, you never hear about him inquiring of the Lord. And so, like you said, he just does what he feels like is the right move. And, he has to watch David inquire of the Lord. And when we go to the Psalms, later on this year, we'll be able to see how much David really inquired of the Lord. We're not really getting that with Joab.
No. And in fact, if he had been, then there's already be some people living that are dead. He's already done some things that were unbiblical and ungodly.
Right.
And he's got a few more in his pocket yet. So, role one is to bring Absalom back. That was he took that on as his personal thing that he wanted to accomplish, right? And this is his personal agenda now.
And it would help the king because the king missed Absalom.
We can see, all right, maybe Joab's heart is not necessarily in the wrong place on this. He wants David to be happy. David's just been a little bit of a sad sack lately. And okay, well, he misses Absalom. I can bring Absalom back. David's happy, and I can smell like a rose too because now I've made the king happy. I promise you there's some Joab in this decision. Very few of his don't have a little bit of Joab.
Well, and potentially he could be thinking, all right, let's see how this is going to play out too. If he knows of anything, any rumors or anything, even at this point, as we're going to get to Absalom's conspiracy, then to overthrow. Maybe he's thinking, okay, well, maybe Absalom, he's definitely shown some ability to fight and to dish out justice or something. So it could be that he's thinking or wondering about what's actually going to happen. His loyalty is to David. I don't think that is questioned, but at the same time, that might be part of it.
If that's in Absalom's head, it's not indicated, but he's in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing the king's face. So maybe during that period of time, he develops some animosity.
Well, it's got to be something that's just growing, is in my mind. From the very beginning, when he doesn't do anything about Tamar and Amnon, then I think it starts there, and it's just been growing. And so I think even in the 2 years, the 3 years, the 2 years, whatever, 7 years, that it keeps growing, and he's kind of formulating, okay, I'm going to make something happen. I'm going to do something. And so by the time he's back and that whole, I haven't seen the king doesn't want me, that type of thing, then I think it's probably already in his head that he's got a plan that he's formulating and he's going to start testing the waters to see whether he can overthrow.
I'd agree.
Or not.
There's some animosity that has developed, and there'd be some natural thinking that one of them's going to be next in line, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would be natural to think, all right, well, why not me? And so I could definitely see that. I believe some of this might be more organic than, thought out 5, 10, 11 years out, just because of how I see him dealing with the people at the gate. Either he's intentional or just comes to him like, okay, these people love me, I could be king. And either way is possible.
Yeah. The way I see it, I don't think we're far off. I think that it is a process. I do think that there's steps along the way, and this is all part of it. And I think that's part of why we are even seeing all of this, is because we can see how we know families function.
Yep.
There's little things here, and then that grows and it grows and it grows, and then all of a sudden now you're finding yourself in a place where you never would have thought that 5 or 6 years ago. And so with Absalom, I think, not only did he do nothing about Tamar, but now you brought me back, but you're not going to talk to me, you're not going to see me.
Right.
And so he's got to force the issue.
Right.
Is kind of how he's looking at it. He's like, you should have just left me where I was. Like, I was good there.
And again, Joab the fulcrum somehow in the middle of this.
Yeah.
It had burnt Joab's field so he could get basically some time with the king.
Yeah.
It was like, so all right, they brought that to a head. And I agree with you. It kind of basically becomes an analogy of all of our sins, right? It never is just one thing. It's usually a trickle.
Yeah.
Small movements over a period of time that turn into big moves.
I think in 14, one of the things that we do need to mention is verse 26, that Absalom, and 25, there's no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut off his hair of his head, for at the end of the year he'd cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. Basically, I think they're mentioning his hair because later on,
Wait
this is foreshadowing.
He got caught by his hair?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
There's some foreshadowing here.
Something's coming here in a minute, right?
And so it's something that I don't have to worry about.
Yeah. Look at you dodge that bullet. Yeah. And 3 pounds is how they translate that here in my version. 3 pounds of hair. That's
a little Fabio guy.
That's a lot of hair.
Yeah.
Chapter 15.
Yeah.
Now is where we definitely begin to see this thing develop.
Yeah, absolutely.
The people start to like Absalom.
Yeah.
Probably because he's good looking.
Well, and I mean, he's smart about it. It's a super easy way to get people on your side. Hey, look, this person is not doing what you want him to do, and I will do it.
Yeah.
And so it's political promises. It's just like, here's a lack, and here's what I can offer. And so won't you follow me?
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, yeah. Yeah.
He gets him some people. He begins to conduct himself like royalty. Nobody gave him that job. He just assumed it. I'd like to hear the perspective of the other brothers at this point. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This feels like something's happening now.
There's so many of them, though.
I know. I was like,
and who knows how many are actually born yet and how many
aren't. At this
aren't.
point, too, there may be some legitimate fear of Absalom.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
I can only imagine.
He has no issue killing somebody. And in a way that's very brutal. And so I was like, well, we don't want to rock that boat. Last guy didn't make it out.
He said to the king in verse 7, please let me go out and pay my vow. And so this is where he's, going to make his move when he gets to Hebron and is declared king over Hebron.
Yeah, it's all very intentional from here. David's response to all this was shocking. I remember the first time I've ever read this. Obviously it's no new news to me now, but the fact that he would just abandon the city and flee doesn't feel in character of what we know about David, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe Absalom got a different response than maybe somebody else would have.
Yeah.
I feel like anybody else, like, no. Let's do this.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's true too, because when they're going to pursue Absalom, then he's like, deal gently, deal kindly with the young man Absalom there in chapter 18. And he says it again, and of course Joab doesn't. But
yeah, it makes me wonder too, how much does David know about his descendant and who will become king? And maybe he's wondering, and I underlined here in verse 25, if I find favor in the Lord's sight, he will bring me back and enable to see both it, talking about the ark, and his dwelling place again, kind of insinuating that, whatever the Lord's will is, if Absalom is king, then God won't bring me back here. But if I'm still king, God will bring me back. And it reminds me of, when he was fleeing from Saul, I'm not going to lift a hand against the Lord's anointed. This, though, is his own flesh and blood. And so it would be a lot harder, I think, to lift a hand against his own flesh and blood, especially if he is unsure whether the Lord has anointed him as king. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I see David in this.
Yeah, I don't like this David. So I like the guy earlier who was like, the scrappy dude.
I mean, he came in, when he first sat on the throne, like he got everything in order. People just dying left and right because they weren't doing things right. And now this is soft David.
It is soft. He's definitely got into his older days. And I was like, yeah, maybe this is it, guys. I was like, come on, man. We can't be talking like that.
I mean, the best we get is for 31 when Ahithophel, he's like, oh Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And so he knew that Ahithophel was loyal to Absalom. And so he's like, well, God, maybe this is the way that you'll move and turn his counsel into foolishness. They also send Hushai to, and so that's part of what God uses.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, now you're the CIA. You're going to do misinformation. You got the counter. And so he had a whole network worked out here as you keep reading. Zadok and Abiathar, they're going to kind of be the people who are going to send the word, and they've got several stops along the way. And so they had a whole thing planned out. This is the underground railroad of their communication system. Word gets to them, and they get it to somebody else who gets it to somebody else, and it's elaborate. He gets found out at one point, right? He tries to chase them down.
Yeah.
I might be ahead of myself at this point, but that's all right. That was 36 of chapter 15, talking about Zadok and
right.
The priests.
The sons there. And so Hushai was going to communicate through them. All right, so chapter 16 then. This is the cursing, at least initially, of Ziba. No, not the cursing of Ziba.
I was going to say, yeah.
Ziba's Ziba's a servant. Where's that dude that curses him?
Shimei, yeah, he's starting in verse 5 and
there it
following.
is. Shimei cursing. That's it. So here, let's talk about Ziba, because every time I read this, have read it, I feel like somebody's not telling the truth.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who's
so
lying? Because Ziba comes out and is like, hey, that guy Mephibosheth, he's siding with his family now. He's just like out with you and in with the new king. And so finally the power shifted back to Saul, and he's the lineage of Saul. And so
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why we see it later on that Mephibosheth is cleared, basically. When he's seen as being kind of in mourning, like when he comes out and he hasn't shaved or whatever.
Shaved, changed his clothes.
And he even says it. He's like, basically, David, I've been faithful to you the whole time.
And actually the servant that you gave me has slandered me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said, we're going to get a donkey and we can ride on because he's lame. And
left me high and dry.
Yeah.
And then made up this mess about me.
Yeah.
And so, at that point, I would like to see more.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I don't feel like justice is really served there. And I think, do we want mercy for ourselves and justice for everybody else, right? But somebody's lying, and I'd like to sniff it out.
Well, and I think part of it too, though, is the point, and as far as maybe perhaps why we don't get more later on, is that it's David being merciful to his enemies, basically, because you've got Shimei coming up later on as well, along with Ziba and Mephibosheth.
I think Ziba's the liar in this one. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe they just didn't cross. Someone said that he misunderstood, but based on Mephibosheth's response, even after their address, David said, "Okay, everything belongs to Ziba now, since he was faithful and Mephibosheth wasn't." And then he finds out, okay, Mephibosheth was faithful, and so now you guys can split everything. And then Mephibosheth comes back, it's like, let him have it. It ain't even about that for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what?
Yeah, you've been gracious to me. You've let me sit at your table, so I'm good.
I was like, maybe that guy's the more righteous one in this situation. I was like, who doesn't want the baby cut in half type stuff, right?
Yeah. So with Shimei, it's interesting because he's throwing insults, of course. He's throwing curses. He's throwing stones and dirt. I mean, to a certain extent, this is kind of a funny picture. What does this guy look like? Because I can only picture him as almost like a caveman, like throwing, like flinging dirt and everything,
like a monkey throwing poop, right? Yeah.
I was actually going to say that. I was like, man, he's only one step away. But anyway,
we found the link.
But the accusations that he brings against David, some are true and some are not. Yes, he is a man of blood, and he's been killing people left and right at times, but as far as the blood guilt of the house of Saul, that is not the case, because David was very clear and many times, and we've seen that many times. So obviously he's stating some truth, but also he's throwing out, and his main accusation is straight up lie. Yeah, it's not true. He's either mistaken or he's lying.
Well, boy, Shimei sit tight. He's gonna see something, because here in a little bit, some more of the house of Saul is gonna get handed over too.
Yeah,
like yikes.
Yeah.
Well, David writes a banger about this one in Psalm 7.
I love that introduction.
He says, "See the one who is pregnant with wickedness, who conceives destructive plans and gives birth to harmful lies. He digs a pit and then falls into the hole he has made." Like he's just giving it back to him. Like basically the whole psalm is, Lord, the curse that he's given upon me, may you give it back to him.
Right.
And yet he pardoned him later.
Yeah.
He does, but Solomon takes care of it.
Yeah.
So I know it's way down the road now, but Solomon tells him, hey, if you ever leave the city, you're dead.
Yeah, and this is a refuge for you.
And so eventually he has a donkey run off and he leaves the city. And so Solomon says, okay, check that box. Who's next? I was like, oh yeah, the one that cursed my dad, you're out.
Yeah, so David, really when it comes down to it, he says, let God do to me as he will. If I truly am guilty, then God will deal with me. And if I'm not, then God will deal with him. And more than that, he's basically the bigger issue for David is that he's like, my own son is against me. What do I care about this guy?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of humility we see in David right now. Yeah. I think he's broken. He's beat up. He's beat down.
He's got to be.
A lot of it from his own activities, but he's a bit of a shell of the man he used to be, unfortunately. And it's but still, there's still some beauty in his humility and before God. It's like whatever God decides, then that's the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas we still want the Hollywood David.
Yeah.
Get a sling, man. Go kill them all. All right. So there's this whole showdown of whose advice we're going to follow.
Hushai gains the trust of Absalom. Obviously, there's competing counsel.
Hushai and the Ahithophel.
Yeah.
The two competing counselors. And so when Absalom sides with Hushai over Ahithophel, he takes it pretty hard, man.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, horsey. He goes home, puts his affairs in order, and kills
hangs
himself.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that was a big deal.
Which we have to be able to see the parallels, even the betrayal of Judas and going out and hanging himself. And it's not as directly correlated, but at the same time, we can see the nuances of, okay, well, we've seen this before, we're going to see it again.
So here's what's interesting. They have always spoken of Ahithophel and his counsel is like that of angels.
Yeah.
It's like this
as if it came from God himself.
This guy's got a wisdom that surpasses everybody else.
Yeah.
And so he's smart enough to know, okay, he didn't follow what I told him. David's going to figure out how to defeat this thing. Ahithophel, if he knew, if this counsel is how you finish the problem, and we didn't do that, then the problem's coming back. And so his time is numbered.
Yeah.
And so he probably had enough wisdom to recognize, okay, if you didn't get David today, you probably ain't going to get him at all. And so then the next step is he's going to get you.
Yeah, and I mean, we can see the providence of God throughout it all as well, just because obviously what seems right in human perspective, that's what we gather that Absalom is following. But at the same time, you would perhaps think, oh yeah, man, we can go get him right now. He's running. Maybe he's not going to kill me, so maybe it's my chance to kill him instead. But as far as the advice that Hushai gives, he's basically saying you need to strengthen yourself because your father, he's not just anybody that you can mess with. He's a man of war. He's got great tactics. So you need to give him some time. You need to take some time. I see that in verse 14 primarily. It says, so when Absalom is talking about it, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord has ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. And it's funny because it's actually what is truly the case is the exact opposite. If he had listened to, again, in our minds, if he had listened to Ahithophel, maybe the tables would have been turned.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, David was in a very low spot there.
Yeah. And not only that, but I mean, that's the whole reason why David sent Hushai in the first place. Right. And this guy is like, oh yeah, this is good. We got this guy. He's got good counsel and just playing right into what David did.
Well, and he didn't give me anything off the wall.
No.
This was still very great counsel. It was like, hey, instead of attacking David right now, where there's a lot of unknowns, and he's got his warriors with him, it may go good, it may not. How about we get the entire army together and attack him? Seems like a safer bet. And so I was, it's from a human perspective, that seems reasonable.
Well, I think it's also reasonable in the sense that David has, in running from Saul, he hid himself many times. Mm-hmm. So, when he says, well, you're going to give him a chance to hide himself type thing.
Yeah, this guy.
Then he's slick.
Involved in guerrilla warfare for better than a decade.
Yeah. What else do we see in 17?
Well, toward the end, Ahithophel hangs himself, and David gets word of what the plan was from Ahithophel, although they didn't follow that one. He still reacts accordingly.
Yeah. And so, God takes care of David and his men through Shobai, or Shobi, son of Nahash, and all the others that came and gave him beds, basins, earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, etc.
Yeah. In Psalm 3, David writes a psalm about when he had fled from Absalom, and it says, "You, O Lord, are a shield that protects me. You are my glory and the one who restores me." And this part here is kind of reminded me of, David could say this confidently because God had taken care of him.
From some enemies, really.
Right, yeah.
Chapter 18, the battle ensues. Absalom has assembled the army from Dan to Beersheba, and they've come after David.
Yeah, they make a big point to say in verse 5, all the people heard when the king gave the orders and the commanders about Absalom, meaning dealing gently with him. And so clearly there's no doubt that that was the command that the king gave, but it is not followed, of course, as we see it played out. It's interesting, too, in verse 8, I don't know really what is meant by the forest devoured more people than the sword, other than, so were there animals, angels there hiding out,
low-hanging
snipers.
branches, quicksand. I mean, I thought of all the stuff, too.
Yeah, straight out of Indiana Jones right here.
Yeah, it was, right. And so, 20,000 were killed. And apparently the forest was...
But it could also be that maybe, as in the same way that Absalom was riding thick branches of the great oak and his head was caught, and that gave him a clear chance to just say, all right, well, you're easy prey.
Right. So that is what happened to Absalom. Hair gets caught in a tree. Nobody does anything to him because they heard what David said. However, when Joab finds out about it, he goes and
he's going to take care of it.
Puts a hole in him.
Yeah. And not just one, right?
3 spears from his hand and thrust them into the middle of Absalom while he was still alive and hanging from the oak tree. Then 10 soldiers who were Joab's armor bearers struck Absalom and finished him off. It feels like a lot, but okay.
Yeah. They made sure this guy was dead.
Oh, boy.
I'm looking at verse 18 again. He set up a pillar in the king's valley he said, I have no son
so
to
Absalom
keep my
had
name.
no heir to carry on after him.
Yeah, I don't know that I really paid attention to that first go around. Stuck on it for a second.
So they considered him a king? I wouldn't consider him as a king, but I guess.
Well, he set himself up as a king and king at Hebron. Like they announced him as king. Like
I guess they did do all that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So was he the 3rd king of Israel?
No, he wasn't over Israel.
He was just Hebron, I guess.
Yeah. So
Judah.
David, when he hears of Absalom's death, this is where the runners are coming, and one is basically kind of lying to him and saying, everything's good, but the second one does. There's a lot of good runners, apparently.
May the enemies of my lord, the king, and all who have plotted against you be like that young man. And that was his response to what happened to Absalom.
Yeah.
The king became very upset.
It's almost like David is like, nah, I'm done for now. He doesn't want to deal with anything, which we understand. It speaks to even the power of the father's love, because Absalom was not a good guy, in terms of towards David. And you might be able to go back and as a father, you're thinking back and be like, yes, I made some mistakes and he's, this is what has led to it. I've caused it. He probably feels a lot of guilt himself, but even still, he's still responsible for his own actions and he's done a lot and he's conspired against you basically. And so, just the amount of the love that David has for Absalom, even though Absalom was against him.
It's interesting to me to see the compassion of David in some areas and then what seems like just his justice in others. And this one is just like an overwhelming amount of compassion. It's good that Absalom died.
Yeah.
And David still grieves, just like it was good when Saul died.
Yeah.
But David still grieved.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just paralleling these two things.
So Joab has a strong word for David after this. David goes off on his his walk of grief to the upper room, and that's where he stays. And so Joab said, today you've embarrassed everybody. Like, wow, this cat. Man, as well as your sons, your daughters, your wives, your concubines, you seem to love your enemies and hate your friends, for you have as much declared today that leaders and servants don't matter to you. Yeah. I realize now that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead,
you'd be celebrating.
That'd be all right with you.
Yeah.
It's like, man, Joab was mad.
Yeah.
He came in. He came in hot.
You can't accuse him of more than that.
You are no good, dirty, rotten. So get up now and go out there and you put on your game face, or I'm gonna beat you with a rubber hose. I mean, he is really giving it straight for the difference in their positions for sure. But he's not wrong. He's like, if you don't get out there, I promise there will not be a single man left here with you tonight.
You wonder if almost it's kind of a threatening tone too.
Yeah.
As far as I'll make sure of it.
It feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like you think what's happened bad today. You just wait. You don't get out there, and this will be worse than anything.
Well, and Joab has been faithful to David up to this point, and so he's seeing it as David's betrayal towards the people, and that's what he's mentioning here. Meanwhile, David is stuck in the fact that this victory has been turned into a day of mourning because of his sin. Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, it's all come down, and he knows that he's got guilt.
Yeah. And it tells us early in 19 that because of the king's response, the day of victory turned into a day of mourning. Mm-hmm. But it looks like he's able to turn it around. He went to the gate, and the people came out, and he smoozed the crowd.
Yeah.
Put on his game face. And there's another point there, too. He was able to hear a word that was not given in the proper tone by the proper person, perhaps at the proper time. I mean, Joab was all wrong in all of this, except for the information was probably right. But David was able to receive it. It's like there's some humility there, too. He just, rather than saying, hey, look, I don't know who you think you are talking to me like that.
Yeah.
Instead, he just he took the advice and changed accordingly.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff that makes me not like Joab.
Yeah.
I mean, he had some good ideas, but this.
Yeah,
It didn't sit well with me.
I didn't
but
like it
also, I underlined, verse 6, you seem to love your enemies and hate your friends. It reminded me of what the Pharisees shouted at Jesus, sitting with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. And they're like, we are the religious folk and you don't even hang out with us. Like, we are the same.
Yeah, right.
And essentially, Jesus has to give them the whole, hey, I come to heal the sick spiel.
Yeah.
And reminds them, love, mercy, and compassion for people.
Unfortunately, Joab is somewhat of an unharnessed power, and he's very powerful.
Yeah.
And this guy is clever. He's brilliant. I mean, we saw with the whole Absalom bringing him back how he used somebody and came up with this whole story that was very effective.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, the wisdom he's given David is correct, but he himself is just, call him the splintered reed, right? You just can't put no weight on him just because you're not sure what direction he's going to go. And
So Joab is related to David too. I think he's his nephew.
yeah.
And so just as David has dealt, interestingly with the rest of his family, Joab is still David's family too. So he could have been like, all right, you're dead. But instead of being like, you're dead, is give a curse one time, and now he lets him talk to him like he's just dirt.
Yeah. What he even says is like, man, I just become powerless with these sons of whoever the father was. I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's like they're too much for me. And David says that they're too much.
Right.
These guys they're so extra. There's places where you want somebody like this. The problem is that you find somebody that is so good at probably what Joab was so good at, which I suspect was just war. I mean, this guy was probably holy terror on the battlefield. That's what the perspective I get. This is not the person you want around you if you're an enemy.
So obviously within all of this, as we continue through chapter 19, we're seeing some of the civil unrest and some of the basically division within the nation. And we see that even more in 20 with Sheba. But essentially what's happening is people are like, are you king? Is somebody else king? Should we get a new king? They're not sure, where they stand with the king. They know that David is anointed king, but they also were like, well, we also set up Absalom. So now what are we going to do? Because he's dead. Anyway, you've got a lot of this. And this is where David is pardoning his enemies as far as like, the people that have kind of come up against him. So Shimei, and is this where Mephibosheth comes in again? Or I guess he comes in later.
Are you talking about
chapter
19?
Yeah, it is Mephibosheth as well. So David is showing some grace and mercy to people, which I guess that could be taken as kingly.
Sure.
He has the right to pardon.
But it is wild that he replaced Joab with Absalom's chief of the army, Amasa.
Yeah, but that doesn't last long.
Not because of David, though.
I know. Joab's like, I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who are you talking about?
Temporary
David?
obstacle for Joab. That's all that is. Light snack, really.
Yeah.
Like David put that poor man right in the crosshair.
I know how to work this guy.
I mean, at this point, you got to know it's like if you want somebody taken out, then you just put him in a position above Joab.
Well, and you got to think that it is probably a show of peace and strength, perhaps, from David to bring him in, because Judah, since Absalom had appointed Amasa, then all the people that had kind of rebelled against David, now when he's bringing him in, it's kind of like okay, well, this is how we're going to go.
Yeah.
It's kind of a political move, perhaps. I mean, we see that clearly Amasa is not perhaps completely on board. Verse 5 of chapter 20, he delayed beyond the set time that he had been appointed. So you got to think maybe he's doing this on purpose. Maybe he doesn't necessarily want David to succeed. And that's probably what Joab is looking at. And he's like, this guy, he can't do anything. So he's like, hey, it's well with you, my brother. It's weird, though, too. How does the NET put it? It says that Joab's sword fell.
Yeah. As he advanced toward Amasa, the sword fell out of his waist. And, I mean, this is my brain, how it works, right? So I picture this whole thing being a planned accident.
Yeah.
And so, that fell out. So when he's picking it up, it doesn't look like he's actually pulling the sword out.
Yeah.
And so he has it in his hand.
Yeah.
And so that's what gave him definitely a military advantage there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, let me pick that up. Got him.
There's a lot of details here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's
Wasn't ready
probably
for.
yeah, that's probably why it stands out
Wind was
too.
blowing from the east.
But I mean, Joab again, without striking a second blow, he takes him, spilled his entrails to the ground, and left him just to bleed out, basically.
That's rough. Squirming there in his own blood in the middle of the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Everybody came to a stop and look.
yeah. And then finally, they were like, "Let's go ahead and cover this guy up, put him out in the field instead."
Yeah, went on his merry way like nothing happened. This is who he is. If there's a psychopath in the Bible, it's Joab.
Yeah.
For real, there's no emotion in this guy as far as he doesn't feel 1 ounce of grief over death. This is just no thing to him.
But at the same time, we see a little bit of reason. Yeah, maybe he's not telling the truth, but as he goes in and they're building up this ramp basically to take the entire city,
Yeah.
the wise woman who comes out and says, "You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel," and he basically says, "No, far be it from me that I should destroy or swallow it up. That's not true. We're just seeking the one guy, basically."
Yeah.
And he goes along with it, so at the very least, he's got some reason.
Yeah,
he doesn't
I'd
end up
more.
destroying.
Why spend your next month out there trying to siege a city when they could just bring him out and you'd be done and go back home?
Yeah, and so they do. She convinces all the other people to give up Sheba, and they cut off his head and give it to him.
Throw it over the wall.
Yeah. Don't worry
wild.
about coming in here.
Yeah.
We're going to keep this locked.
So, for those watching at home, you want to know where Red Rover started?
Oh, my goodness.
Send Sheba right over. Just his head, though.
So what about 21, when David is dealing with the Gibeonites?
Yeah, that's tough, man. This is brutal. But,
It is.
What can you say? This is of God. Saul had mistreated so many people that it was coming back to roost a little bit. There was an imbalance in the scale of justice, and so it had to be balanced.
Well, and it's
Yep.
interesting, too, because the Gibeonites, it wasn't like they were above board in making the covenant and the treaty with Israel in the first place. They were the ones who were like, they pretended to be foreigners and all
they
that. And,
deceived Israel, basically.
yeah, so they're like, "Oh, we come from a long way, make peace with us, and we've heard of this God that you serve," and so it doesn't seem like, it seems like God would have been okay with them being wronged.
Well,
so to
so I
speak.
think at this point the omen is on the integrity of the people of
Yeah,
God.
it
So
is.
it's like, we're going to do it not because of you guys, but because of us, which is very instructional in us.
Yeah.
And so we say, okay, we maintain our vows whether you do or don't.
Correct.
And it's because it's a matter of integrity, and we serve a God who honors integrity.
Yeah, they legitimately had something, regardless of how it came to be that they had a covenant. They legitimately had a complaint and a injustice for them.
Yes.
And so now they've got, this is how God responds. It's God's okay with it, just in terms of the famine and lifting the famine and everything.
I was like,
So-
what do you want? David asked him, well, we don't really need anything, but if you got
7 people.
7 of Saul's people over there that we can kill, that'd be all right.
7.
That feels so nonchalant, doesn't it? I was like,
I didn't read it like that, but you made it.
all right. Well, maybe I messed it up for some people at home too. It just seems to me like I don't know what you get out of that. If it gives you gold or silver or a city, I feel like you got something. Then, if you kill some people, what you got?
Well, and obviously we don't have all the details. The 7 could just be for the fact that 7 is a significant number within Scripture. Or it could be that maybe they really did feel like, hey, there's 7 individuals that really, were on the blunt end of Saul's mistreatment or something. I don't really know.
I think there's a
remember,
strong
but-
sense of injustice here that they felt, but maybe had not communicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is weird that they said, we don't really need anything.
But we
Really?
like
But-
kill some people.
Yeah. And maybe
You
the
gotta
way
go.
that I read it was, we don't want material things. We
Right.
want
Blood.
justice. Yeah.
Yeah, we want justice.
Yep. Well, and obviously that was the ticket because
Yeah, God relented and responded to the plea for
that
the land.
balanced the scale.
So after that, we get a lot of giants or descendants of giants listed in the
It just-
tail end of 21. Just kind of takes a turn, says all the warring with the Philistines and all these people that came from giants.
At some point, you think you'd sniff out the root of all this. Like, who keeps making all these giants?
Yeah.
It's like, let's kill them.
I like the name Ishbi Benob. And
Middle-
he had a spear that weighed 300 bronze shekels.
How heavy is that?
I don't know.
Half of the Goliaths. So I did
So
go back.
it wasn't even that great.
Yeah, I looked back and I think with Goliath it was mentioned as 600. So it's only half.
Okay.
And I think it was working out to about 22 pounds for 600 shekels. So this might be 11 pounds. So, I mean, 11 pounds of a head of a spear is still something significant.
Yeah, very significant. Got a bowling ball attached to the end of a spear.
Yeah.
There's a song here in 22 that Josh was going to sing for us.
It's Psalm 18, basically. Actually, word for word.
I knew you were ready.
I was waiting for it too.
You want me to give you a note?
It's not as poetic
No, it's not.
in English
No.
as it probably was in ancient Hebrew that we don't know how to pronounce.
It'd be hard to believe that, too.
Yeah, there's a lot in here as far as David being poetic. He obviously at some points makes it seem like, man, really, was it that bad? Some of the things that, is like the foundation of the earth shook and everything. And but at the same time, he's recognizing what God has done and that God is the one who is the source of victory, of peace, of creation, of all these different things. God is his refuge. He's his strength. Many times he mentions his strength. And then the purified and humble people is a big deal too. I do want to ask, though, in verse 21, the Lord dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He rewarded me, for I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from God. All his rules were set before me, and his statutes I did not turn aside. I was blameless before him. I kept myself from guilt. Clearly, we know that is not 100% true.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we
How
don't know
should
when
we-
he wrote this.
Well, and obviously, either way, it's not going to be true. There's no way he kept all the commands.
yeah, correct. And so the only thing that I can come to a conclusion on is this has got to speak to the general forgiveness of God and the difference between somebody who is prideful and arrogant and continuing in sin versus one who is repentant and, seeking the face of God. And so when we turn and we confess, then God is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins. And we know that part of that forgiveness is that he is giving us a clean slate. And so this is David trusting in his position before God. And I think David did, from what we see in Psalms and other places, it seems like David did have this understanding that there was going to be a Messiah that's how he was going to be made pure, that God was going to act and he was going to be purified. That created me a clean heart type idea, all of that.
Well, and I would also include with this that I think David genuinely did pursue righteousness, and so
Yeah.
which we obviously was not Saul's position, and so even especially early in life, even before the failure of Bathsheba, we would say, okay, here's a guy who is desperate to please God, and how he deals with people, and how he executes justice, and how he doesn't lift his hand against the anointed, how he takes care of those who do. We can see it over and over again. Here's a guy who really is pursuing righteousness in his behaviors, which comes from a heart that, wants to love God, right? So I think some of that plays into his perspective of how God is pleased.
Yeah. I feel like, as we've been reading this whole second half of 2 Samuel, this is where we see a lot of David's flaws. And honestly, you don't get to know the heart of what David is thinking because we're just reading it as from the narrator's perspective.
Sure.
So you really have to dig into these songs that he's written to kind of understand, what is David even thinking in all this. And I think based on that, he seeks the Lord in everything. And so when world is crashing down around him, he's seeking the Lord. When things are great, he's seeking the Lord. He can give compassion to all his enemies because he's seeking the Lord and he has the Lord's heart. And so, we talk about David's, some things can be perceived as kingly, some things can be perceived as weakness, but I truly believe that he sought the Lord in all of his decisions. And even in the consequences of his own sin, he was still trusting in the Lord as a shelter and protector. And he said at the end of this psalm, he is faithful to his chosen ruler, to David and to his descendants forever.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is the hope that David has clung on to.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into chapter 23 as far as the oracle of David. And he says that the Spirit of the Lord speaks to me. His word is on my tongue. The God of Israel has spoken. The rock of Israel has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light. And I think that's kind of where David he's leaning on God. He's saying he's describing himself in the sense of, I've sought to deal justly and lean on God within this. And so that's why he is able to sustain, essentially. He has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered all things, and secure. Big long list of all David's mighty men.
Yes.
There's 37 in all in chapter 23.
These were some bad dudes.
Yeah. Taking on a great number of people.
Yeah.
And then chapter 24.
Interesting way to end.
Yeah. So first off, why was the census wrong?
Because God told them, don't number the people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it wasn't for David to do.
Yeah.
It kind
But-
of also shows that he was relying on, his military strength rather than the strength of God too. So, yeah.
But in verse 1, it says, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, go number Israel and Judah. Now, given, I think this is where Chronicles mentions that it's Satan, or at least somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but it mentions the accuser. And then also in Hebrew, I remember looking it up a little bit just to see, was it specifically that's translated that God is the one who incited? And there's not really any pronoun or any noun like source. So it's kind of just assumed. And so you can either assume that it was God, it could be assumed that it's his anger, it could be assumed that it's even David. It's very kind of loose in the translation. And so, just like always, regardless, God is still right and sovereign in what he wants to do. Yep. Did he allow Satan to entice David? Did he allow Satan or David's mind to run and just do it of his own volition? Maybe so. But we do see God's hand in all of it, that his anger was kindled against Israel.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting also is Joab hears the voice of reason.
Yeah.
Like, daggone. Just when you had him down.
Yep.
It's just we had this guy figured out.
Job's like, are you sure? I'm not so sure that this is a good idea.
This, man. And, whatever his motivations are, he was still right here. Let's don't do it. And David said, no, I didn't ask for your opinion.
Yeah, do it anyway.
I find it's interesting that God allows David to choose his consequence.
Yeah.
I want that every time.
I mean, none of them were a good option. Like,
no, they weren't.
I mean, when you're thinking about it, there's still punishment.
Like, is there a number 4? The first 3 didn't sound so great.
So that whole idea that we've just been talking about, where you can choose your sin but not your consequences, that wasn't true for David.
Right. David got to choose his consequences here.
Oh, he only chose an aspect of it.
Yeah. He says, I'd rather fall in the hand and the mercy of God rather than men. But it still resulted in 70,000 men dying.
70,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. It's not quite 1%, but still, or 10%, but it's still a lot. And it had big ramifications. That's for sure.
The concluding story in the book is David offering a sacrifice on the threshing floor of Aruna. Mm-hmm. And so, the sermon from that is that David is not going to offer that which cost him nothing. And so that's kind of our takeaway from all of that, the fact that he could have had it for free and chose instead to pay, and because worship has to have an element of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't cost anything, there's no sacrifice. There's no element of worship there.
Yeah, it's too easy.
It's too easy, yeah. And so if you're not willing to sacrifice, then there's no value. And if there's no value, then it's not God. It's something else. It's idolatry. It's something. But we sacrifice for the things that we value.
Yeah. I mean, you're right in the fact that if we take worship as worthship and worthy, then we're attributing something as worthy. If it's not costing us anything, then
What's
is it
worth?
really worthy? Yeah. Is it worth
How much
anything
worth
in
are
our
we showing?
eyes? Yeah. So
Like, I can't quite make it today. It's like I'm just lazy. Like, well, rethink it.
Is this this has connections too, right? The threshing floor.
Yeah, I think this
Is
is
this
where they ended
where
up building the temple.
The temple. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I couldn't remember, and I didn't take the time to
But
check
I'd have
on
to
it.
go look that up
Yeah,
somewhere.
we'll find it.
Yeah.
We'll just.
I mean,
remember.
we'll get to it.
We'll
in,
definitely
the next
remember.
podcast.
Yeah, right. What day is it?
In
What's my
several
name?
podcasts later.
All right. Well, that wraps up 2 Samuel.
Yep.
Join us next week
And Kings.
for the Kings.